Welcome to American Dreams, Keys to Success, with your host, Alan Olson.
Welcome back. I have here today with me Dennis Wolf. He's the CEO of Healthcare Claims Consulting, and he's also the author of The Sixth Solution, the prescription for national healthcare. Dennis, welcome to today's show.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be here.
So, Dennis, according to the new projection put out by the Congressional Budget Office, Obama's new healthcare plan will cost $1.76 trillion over 10 years. Now, originally, when this was signed into law, the projection was that it would only cost $940 billion.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on the effects of this cost adjustment?
Well, healthcare in this country is a monopolistic system when it comes to cost. The $900+ billion that President Obama was referring to, and he campaigned on that in September 2009 of this great speech he gave, was an error then, and I would submit to you right now that $1.76 trillion is an egregious error as well. I think the cost could double beyond that, because when you take a healthcare system that is monopolistically driven, then the prices can go wherever the medical community wants them. The government can only afford so much, so that essentially what you'll see happening is that this number's low, and it will ultimately lead to healthcare rationing.
Healthcare rationing.
Sure.
You know, it sounds like it's something that out there in the future. Last week I was at Stanford. On Friday they had their annual economic conference put on by the Stanford Institute of Economic Research, and they had two senators there. One was Senator, let's see, it was Kent Conrad. Okay, he was a U.S. Senator from North Dakota.
North Dakota,
and he was
right.
the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. The other was William Hoagland. And William was the Vice President of Federal Affairs for Cigna Corporation. And they began talking about their budgets and their forecast. And one thing that they brought out there is they said, you know, when we go beyond 6 months in Congress, we really don't know what we're doing.
That's right.
You know, we're just projecting, and we're, you know, and said the reality is whatever we say out there doesn't matter. We don't think beyond what's immediately in front of us. But when we get down to health care, when we get down to these federal budgets and where we're currently at, no one has a solution to what's going on.
Well,
except you, Dennis. Now, you wrote a book on this thing about 20 years ago.
actually in 1986,
That's more than
when
20 years ago.
Senator Kennedy
Yeah.
and Senator Kassenbaum from Kansas, I believe, got together and added the COBRA Amendment to the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1986. I had been in the insurance business 10 years, and I have a degree in finance, accounting background. And I looked at this and I go, uh-oh, what they couldn't do through the front door, because everybody knows Senator Kennedy always wanted to have national health insurance, they did it through the back door. They created an economic crisis that we saw manifest itself in the late 80s, early 90s. So I said, you know, there's got to be a better way. So to summarize my book, basically in 3 words, I created a system that regionalizes with accountability, and it puts the direct control of healthcare in the hands of the regions, be they counties, groups of counties, a whole state, whatever the demographics dictate, but the control rests, R-E-S-T, rests with directly the consumers in that region and the healthcare providers in that region. And by doing that, you create microeconomic bubbles of healthcare services that macroscopically across the country creates competition.
So you're a believer in getting rid of Medicare?
I am definitely a believer in getting rid of Medicare, and not that I want to get rid of it to not have care for seniors, as is what's happening with Obamacare, but I wanted to get rid of Medicare because we should all be under one health care system. And I would change the definition of retirement as retired due to age. You work till you don't want to work anymore. And frankly, the baby boomer generation right now is hitting a terrible point where we're forcing ourselves to work every day till we drop.
You know, it's interesting. The Huffington Post ran an article, it was this week, a few days back, and it said the following: healthcare costs will be higher than half this country's income by 2037.
Well, let's use an example. Just recently, my mother passed away in December, and prior to her passing and prior to her last bout with health care, she virtually never went to the doctor. Her blood pressure was actually she did have congestive heart failure, but it had been mitigated. It was under control and everything until the last few months. In those last few months, her bills were $400,000 or $500,000 in and out of the hospital, nursing care. I finally brought her home, and gave 24-hour care at home at our own personal expense, and she passed peacefully. But the bottom line is, here's someone who never had any health care expenses. And the last few months ran up that much. My wife, as you know, in 2011 had a massive stroke, and she's doing okay. Her bills were almost $600,000.
So from personal experience, you were seeing, what the effect of this outrageous system is. Dennis, we have to take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Okay.
Nothing's more important than spending time with your family.
At Greenstone Rogo Polson Company, we're trusted advisors to the highly successful. Our goal is to help you find the right strategy to protect your wealth for yourself and those you love. Kids, why do I feel like I've just had an audit?
As trusted advisors to the highly successful, we'll make sure that you don't lose your shirt.
Rogo helping you along the way.
Welcome to American Dreams, Keys to Success, with your host, Alan Olson.
Welcome back. I'm here today with Dennis Wolf. He's the author of The Sixth Solution, a prescription for national health care. Dennis, as you mentioned earlier, you wrote this book back in 1986.
Right.
So a real forward thinker.
Well, the title of the book, and you said it essentially, but it's Sixth Solution, a prescription for national health. Because it was my contention then that how we moved forward to resolve the delivery of health care at affordable costs was how the nation moved forward. Do we want the nation to move forward as a capitalistic country or a socialistic country? And my premise was that we were a foundation of capitalism. We still need to be there. But we do have to have those layers of protection for those that can't afford it. And so that's the way I designed the plan. And now people are coming to me and going, wow, this is pretty cool. But the problem is that you've got this Obamacare, which is going to drive us right over the cliff into socialism.
Oh, let's talk about Obamacare. Now, right now, the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the Obamacare in terms of the constitutionality of that.
Right.
That will happen in March of 2012, this month.
Right.
And they're going to have 5.5 hours of oral
More
arguments.
than they've given ever in the history of the court.
Yeah, the most ever.
Most ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty big issue.
So because this is an individual mandate, does Congress' power to regulate interstate commerce extend to punishing the inactivity of not buying insurance? Is this just one of the law's constitutionality's dubious features?
Well, let's educate the consumer listening to this right now.
Let's go into this.
Okay. Number one, Social Security was a mandate. And the way they argued it to the Supreme Court, we all know the history. Roosevelt tried to pack the Supreme Court. But what they did was they argued that it was a tax, that it wasn't just something else that everybody had to say, because Congress has the right to raise taxes. So Obama and the whole team argued, this is not a tax, this is buying insurance, but now they're going to the Supreme Court saying, it's a tax, we're allowed to do a tax. So you can't have it both ways. The question is, were you lying then, or are you lying now? I mean, that's really cut and dry. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, it seems that what's happening, though, is they're reducing the authority of each state government.
Well, they're undermining the sovereignty of every state. And the whole issue here centers around the rights of the state that don't go to Congress. The states have their own rights. Now, I'd like to use just a little bit here about Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's getting blasted for quote-unquote Romney care, and they're trying to tie him to, well, he helped build Obamacare. The reality is, whether you like Massachusetts' law or not, the fact is that what Mitt Romney did was essentially support every single state in this country with the right to do what they want, what their citizens want. The citizens of Massachusetts wanted that, and the governor allowed that because that's what the citizens wanted. What President Obama is doing is telling everybody, not asking. He's telling everybody, we're just going to do this.
Now, I understand
and you can't do that.
I understand there's quite a few states that are just saying no.
26 states have joined together in this, and the real issue here is going to come down to one judge, and that's probably Kennedy, because you've got Kagan and Sotomayor, who are two of Obama's appointments, and there's real issues with Kagan's credibility on this, whether she'll recuse herself or not, because of all the issues related to her involvement in the actual passing of Obamacare, proven or not. Those are issues out there. You're pretty much sure you're going to get 4 votes that says it's legal, but there's no severability clause in the Obamacare legislation.
So what can a state do against this plan right now? Any actions? That
Well,
they're
doing it right now with the Supreme Court, and I think the real issue here is that this country's going to have to make a serious decision this November. Do we want to vote back in people who want to push this on? Because once you pass this, if the Supreme Court says this mandate and I can't understand for the life of me how they could come to that conclusion, is acceptable, then, well, everybody must buy a Chevy Volt.
You know, to put it in perspective, like Florida, 26% of their budget, if Obamacare goes into effect, will go into this health care.
Yeah, who can afford this?
Yeah.
That's why I said in the very first segment, $1.76 trillion, double it.
So opting out of this, it seems like there's really no options here.
Well, you've got a czar now, the Department of Health and Human Services, Captain Sebelius.
Hey, Dennis, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Protecting your family's health and welfare is a sacred trust. At Greenstein Rogoff Olson Company, we know that sound financial planning will protect them now and in the future. We're certified public accountants with tax services for the highly successful. For your business and your family, call GrowCo.
Greenstein Rogoff Olson Company will help you manage your financial affairs so you can focus on what's really important in life.
GrowCo, helping you along the way.
Welcome to American Dreams, Keys to Success, with your host, Alan Olson.
Welcome back. We're here today visiting with Dennis Swift. He's the CEO of Healthcare Claims Consulting. Also, Dennis wrote a book in 1986 on the Sixth Solution, a prescription for national health. And, Dennis has been forward thinking about this day today that we're in with all this Obamacare. So, this month, it's an important thing that's happening. We're getting clouded with what's happening in the political arena, but there's even a more major decision out there with respect to health care, Obama health care. The Supreme Court has agreed to 5.5 hours of hearing. Right. Listening to this. And to go back and review on this, what's really happening here. In 1987, to give a parallel example, 1987, the Supreme Court agreed to hear an argument about the federal highway tax.
I don't recall that one. I won't.
Okay. Well, basically the court upheld a federal law denying a portion of the federal highway funds to the states that refused to implement the drinking age of 21.
Interesting. Okay,
so the court held that the threatened loss of funds, only 5% was relatively small, inducement, and hence no coercive. It's not so coercive as to pass the point at which the pressure turns into compulsion. The court thereby said the federal government cannot behave like the Don Corleone and make offers the states cannot refuse. At some point, the government crosses the threshold of unconstitutional compulsion. And so what this argument is coming before the Supreme Court is really based on the Constitution.
It is all about the Constitution.
So our Constitution right now created a federal government of limited and enumerated powers and promptly strengthened this with the 10th Amendment. The Supreme Court held that the states therefore retain a residuary and an inviolable sovereignty incompatible with federal commandeering of the states, legislatures, and executives. Under Obamacare, Medicaid expansion, states are dragooned into the furtherance of the federal objectives.
Yeah.
So
it's a total intrusion upon states' rights, and
upon our Constitution.
I would say right now, on the record, I think, and I said this in 2009. I had a video we put out on YouTube, and I said in early 2009 that this legislation was going to pass by reconciliation. Everybody thought I was crazy, and the reason I said it was because the majority of the people, they know something wasn't right, and they didn't want it, and they let their legislators know it. But Senator Harry Reid, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and President Obama all knew that, therefore, it had to go back through the system, and they used reconciliation to pass this on Christmas Eve. That's subversive action on our federal government. Now it's in the Supreme Court, and the real issue here is this mandate. Because if they can mandate this, they literally can take confiscatory control over our lives. The Constitution of this country hangs by a thread right now. And if this passes, then Katie barred the door as far as what the federal government can take over with respect to states. So I am afraid for our country.
This is a huge argument because it's just Obamacare is the issue here, but actually there's a huger underlying issue.
The real issue is how much power is coming out of Washington to take over.
This is what the country stood for is the sovereignty of each and every individual state.
Let's not forget that the Constitution itself was nearly lost, except for Alexander Hamilton, later Chief Justice John Jay, and Madison all got together and wrote the Federalist Papers, which they used to make the arguments for the importance of the Constitution. And that Constitution then had to be amended with what we know today in 1791 with the Bill of Rights. We are really at a crossroads in this country.
So what can the individual listener do today?
Well, right now, there's not a lot they can do. They've elected a man who stacked a court with two really very liberal leftists. And the danger is, are they going to get to Kennedy, who's the swing vote? You've got 4 conservatives, you've got 4 leftists, liberals, 4 right-wingers, 4 left-wingers, whatever you want to call them. And you've got a person in the middle, Kennedy, who sometimes has moments of brilliance on both sides of his argument. And the question is, how's he going to weigh in on this? The bottom line is that this mandate clause is bigger than that. And now you've got the Supreme Court literally going to be legislating from the bench because there is no severability clause in this legislation. If they strike down the mandate, then the entire legislation is ruled unconstitutional. If they don't strike down the mandate, then everything's in play. Well, the Supreme Court might say, well, the mandate is not valid, but the rest is okay. So that means that the Supreme Court is in the awkward position now of legislating from the bench. And we've seen enough of that with courts, and the people are upset about it. So the best solution is this country's going to have to make some decisions this November over who it puts in power, and will the person in power, and will the House and the Senate pass legislation to repeal it, if it passes, if the Supreme Court rules for it.
When we're looking at what's going on out there, you made a mention about the Constitution hanging by a thread. That's an interesting...
I stand on that.
Yeah.
I think we are in very dangerous water here because, it only takes a couple of decisions for a country to turn away from a democratic republic. We are a republic. We're not a democracy. And people lose sight of that. They don't even understand the Constitution. And when you have people saying, well, we can interpret the Constitution as a living, breathing document. No, we can't. The words in there say what they say for a reason. And if anything, the Constitution does more to thwart and block Congress from getting anything done than to get too much done and take away the powers of the states. And if we allow the federal government to have that control, then why have states?
As an inspired document when the Constitution came out with the checks and balances that we have in this country.
Right.
But there really does seem to be a run on it recently.
I'm like I said, I'm very afraid for where our country is right now. And when it comes to health care, people really don't grasp health care until they need it. And then when they need it, they have nowhere to go. They don't know what to do. They're completely lost. I have clients that are Medicare clients. It's a nightmare for these people. It's getting so bad that major medical clinics, even here in the Bay Area and around, are now telling the major carriers, we're no longer accepting what you pay. We'll just deal direct with Medicare.
Wow. And as we get older, it becomes more of a relevant issue to us.
You bet it does.
So Dennis, if someone wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
Well, they can contact me through my website. We have a new website that we're developing, and the website address I think is very simple. It is the phone number 1-800-WE-CARE-FOR-YOU, and you can spell for you either way you want, with the number 4, with the letter U, FORYOU. It doesn't matter. All 4 will get to the website 1-800-WE-CARE-FOR-YOU.com. And the website is about helping people better understand the healthcare system. It's a growing website. There's a tracking product in there to allow people to put their claims in and keep track of all their medical records on file. There's a page for resources. We call it LAUGHTER, which is actually an acronym. We all know laughter is the best medicine, but in reality it's an acronym, and it stands for Learn and Understand Good Health Through Educational Resources.
Hey, Dennis, thank you for being on today's show. We got to take a quick break.
Sure.